When Scott Derrickson left Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, he left it to make a small horror film with his friend C. Robert Cargill. Doctor Strange came out to some mixed to positive reviews.
Yes.
And
Yes.
The Black Phone is currently my number 2 favorite film of the year. So
Okay.
we'll talk about whether or not he made the right call. He did. Welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for finding us. Thanks for watching. And for our loyal fans, thank you for continuing to support the show. Hey, you can follow the show on Twitter and on Instagram. We do have our Patreon. Check that out for some great deals for movie picks as well as some influence. We got some good stuff to check out on Patreon as well. Both Kyle and I are members of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check out that webpage for film critics reviews as well as ours. And today we're talking about probably the most talked about horror movie of 2022. It is Black Phone.
Yeah. So North Denver in 1978 is a place filled with childhood fear. Finney Blake has to grapple with bullies, an abusive alcoholic father, and the infamous child abductor dubbed the Grabber. When Finney becomes the Grabber's next target, he must find a way to escape with a little help from the Grabber's prior victims.
Okay, so I didn't actually watch the trailer for this. I tried to do your angle of things, just kind of going blindly. And it's very interesting. If you didn't really know, it's supposed to take place in the 70s. I didn't really read the book as well. That's one of the fascinating points of this. It's very much an old-fashioned horror movie. So a lot of we had a lot of, believe it or not, we had a lot of child abductions in the 70s and in the 80s too.
There are some of them referenced by the characters in the film, specifically the Paperboy is actually based on one where they found the bike, they found the dog, and they never found the kid. So there is kind of that element of realism in the sense that Scott Derrickson grew up in North Denver, and of course Joe Hill, who wrote the story that the film is based on, was a Boulder kid. So there was a lot of that kind of like part of America growing up, especially during that time period. Scott Derrickson had he doesn't talk about it much, but he has referenced the fact that he did not have a great childhood at times, that there was some really dark stuff in his past, and he said he was using this film as an option to confront childhood fear, confront terror, and also give it an uplifting, hopeful finale.
That's his thing. That's his personal bias flavor. It has to have hope into it. All right.
I like hope when it's taken away, and I like when it's given back.
This is a weird perception because this is more of a child going through the crucible rather than, because he has the bad guy on the cover, but it's not really about him at all.
No, it's just that your movie will sell with Ethan Hawke wearing a really messed up looking face.
If you didn't know, the inspiration is Lon Chaney from London After Midnight. It's a movie we can't find. It's MGM. It was burned in MGM's safe vault. It's one of the famous movies that got burned in their vault. It happened in the 50s. And you can't find a print of it. And it's one of those movies that I don't think is the greatest movie, but it's so iconic because we can't find it. And you have this image of Lon Chaney with the stove hat and the look. And that's very much how Ethan Hawke's mask and the hat looks in this movie.
Well, there's some interesting stuff because again, that's the kind of movie where we talk about it because it doesn't exist. I'm still convinced someone will find a copy of it one day. I know it's out there. When you look at Ethan Hawke's The Grabber, though, the villain in the story was supposed to be a guy who dressed up like a clown. But in a post-it world, even Joe Hill, son of Stephen King, said that wouldn't work in a movie. And so he was totally open. And that's what I like about Joe Hill and his dad. They're totally open to you as a filmmaker. You come in, you take the work, and you meld it into your own thing.
Right.
And so he actually had the conversation with C. Robert Cargill, our co-screenwriter, Scott Derrickson, the director, about we should change that kind of thing up. That should be different. And so he was fine with it. I like that because had this guy been dressing up like a clown, I don't think it would have worked as well. We already just got two It movies.
It would cheapen it.
Yeah, and we've got so many killer clown movies out there. I mean, we've talked about some recently on the show.
We got the Joker. It's been saturated.
Yes.
I think you had to find some different angle to it. I don't know. I'm complex with the villainy. I don't get a real motivation behind it other than that he just likes to hurt. I don't really understand he doesn't like his face. There's something about it that I'm missing to the motivations. We talk about motivations for killers, not really that important, but I need something that just what drives this guy to constantly do this. This is his one focus.
See, and that's why I think it's, since our centralized character is Mason Thames as Finney, who's fantastic in the movie, who has to carry most of the movie as a kid alone
that's what
inside
I'm saying.
of a
It's
room.
very deceiving that you think it's all about the bad guy, but it's not.
Yeah. What's important to me is, we don't get the detailed motivation of the grabber, why he's doing this. We know enough about his killing technique, about his kidnapping technique. We know about the kind of things that drive him in that perspective.
And it's very tedious.
Yeah, and so he's a guy that actually, I get the sense that there's personality breaking, and that's why the mask changes. Is depending on the mask, he's a different version of himself because he acts differently with every mask variation. And side note, the mask was actually created and developed by Tom Savini, who actually created all the different two pieces that click together. And that way you kind of get multiple different versions. But he does seem like a guy who, when we see in the film, the mask comes off, he's very, very distraught over what's happening. It's almost like he places the mask on and becomes a different person.
Well, it's almost like if you take the mask off, he feels emasculated or impotent.
Yeah.
And he feels like
vulnerable.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then that's like but I need something like what happened to make him like that. Obviously, Jason wants to put on the mask just to ominous thing to terrify you.
Yeah.
It's just a terrifying
He wants
thing.
vengeance for his mother, you know.
Right.
Freddy, we get the clear cut. He was betrayed by the people of town, and so he's going to go after their children until there are none left. Michael, depending on which version you watch, he's going after his family or he's trying to return home. So they each have that kind of like centralized idea to it. Yeah, we don't really get the Grabber's central motivation for creation.
And it's not my overall criticism of the movie, but I think overall what I like about this movie, and I think it's actually one of motivations of courage. I think Mason's character needed it. He has assistance for motivations. You see he has a little bit of courage, but I think overall it's selling assistance to build up his courage. Obviously his sister has it.
Yeah.
So I think the overall thing, because at the end, I think it explains a little bit better because then he's assertive of himself, feels comfortable being himself, but he had to go through this crucible to find out who his authentic self is. Writer point number one, that's what I look for. Did your character look for his authentic self and get it? And we do get that.
Well, and one of the things, too, is when we look at, again, we're going to talk about the spoiler film. Go check it out online if you want to see it.
Yeah.
The idea, too, that he gets the help and the assistance, it's really more of the motivation to the drive to escape, because even the motivation he gets from the black phone, he still is the one who's the architect of his escape. He still has to use what he's learned before and form it to himself. What I appreciate about the film is that, you know, I try to avoid seeing the trailers, but I go to the movie theaters a lot. This trailer played in front of everything for like 6 months.
But it's
so I had seen the trailer. I assumed he was going to get kidnapped at the very beginning. What that doesn't happen is we get like 30 minutes. We get almost a third of the runtime setting up the character motivations.
Very much like Days of Confused in the beginning.
Yeah, it feels
it feels like Days of Confused. The music and of course it has the baseball, the kids playing baseball and stuff like that.
Yeah. So we get the elements of like we know Finney's story before he even really starts a story. We get his character, and I really appreciate that Cargill and Derrickson are willing to take the time to set this thing up, because when it actually happens, when he's actually taken, we've already got the infamy of the grabber. We've had two other kids that we've seen in the film get kidnapped, and now he's the third. And so it's like we know kind of like the dread we should feel of this, and then we can start the story. It feels like almost the credits should have played 30 minutes into the movie.
Initially, this film was supposed to come out at the same time as Scream. I think they made the right call, hold him back and make it as around August that this got released. I think
in June,
in June. I think that was the right decision because it's very different. I don't put it as a horror movie. I don't think there's enough content you could definitely find it in the category. But for Scream fans, that is a horror movie, even though that's, what is a horror movie and all that stuff. But I think this was marketed as a horror movie, but then when you watch it, it's definitely adolescence motivation. I think you have a vessel to talk about growing up.
And I mean, like, the elements between thriller and horror are so interconnected at this point that if you get something that's... The problem is, I think nowadays, and I'm not saying that you're saying this, I'm saying that nowadays people tend to see horror as jump scares, or they tend to see horror as like, like it's got to have that moment where people scream in the seats. And I was in a packed theater. I mean, it was one of the most packed theaters I've ever been to, also one of the worst theater experiences of my life. We'll talk about that another time. But the movie was packed with people. I didn't hear a lot of screams. I didn't hear a lot of general
all
fear.
the things that we regard as what you would see in a horror movie.
Yeah, and again, like that's because like it allows itself to take the time and energy to build up the character, to move things forward. We get large stretches of the film where it's not so much horror, there's disturbing qualities going on. The whipping of his sister is really hard to watch.
Yeah.
But it's not exactly a horror moment. It's just horrific in itself. What I do appreciate is, January has kind of been slowly losing that stink of the graveyard for films. It's been slowly
we
losing that
critiqued a
sting.
horror movie from January before, yeah.
But you had Scream and this film both set to come out in January, and I think it's funny that test screenings were so positive. They were like, "Wait, we don't have to bury this." That Blumhouse was so convinced this movie might not be good that they were planning on putting it out in January to kind of just get it out there. Then they had a good test screening. They're like, "Oh, we got to put this out when people are going."
It might have been the almost very, you're dancing on clickbait almost, because it's so much things that you don't regard as for a horror movie.
Yes.
Yeah. A movie I think you would recommend is kind of very, when I watched this, it's very similar to, and that's 1986 River's Edge with Keanu Reeves. It's very much similar. It's guarded as almost a teenage coming of age, but there's very disturbing elements to that. You have Dennis Hopper pretty much doing the same role he did in Blue Velvet. You have a teenager that murders his girlfriend on the river's edge. The boy witnesses it. Check it out. But it runs very similar to the context. You think you won't find River's Edge as a horror movie, but it's very disturbing images. It doesn't have the jump scares and all that stuff. But here you have a very outrageous villain. But I think it's not the concentration, not the focus of the movie.
Yeah.
Where you think almost like Friday the 13th or something like that. That's what is kind of the surprise to me. It's not the focus of the movie, even though he's on the cover.
Yeah, it feels closer to, I would say, if we were going to look at our big three, it feels closest to me of a Freddy Krueger-like interaction, because the film Nightmare on Elm Street, the original film, is so focused on Nancy. It's so focused on our final girl. That Freddy is only a big deal because he's theatrical, and that's kind of how this film is the Grabber's only big thing is like he's a very wide open character. I mean, he's got the elements. He's got the black balloons, and he's got the dark van, and he wears the face makeup when he's out in public. He's got the stovepipe hat.
Very close for being cliched. I was like, you're getting very close to it.
Yeah. And it's a question of then, like, do we follow our main character, or are we there for the killer? You know what I mean? And that's kind of, I think, the difference here is that we sell the film as an Ethan Hawke film.
Yeah, I've always been apologetic for Scott Derrickson. I think Doctor Strange and a lot of other films. He does the same cinematographer that he works before. This is the same movie. Both the screenwriter Cargill and him worked for the Doctor Strange script, and then they kind of struggled with doing the sequel for Doctor Strange. But I like the Doctor Strange movie. I think it was one of the best films of 2016. I think it was refined. It was one of those that looked like dancing on horror movie, but it's not a horror movie.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Scott does, is like, all right, you think this is a horror movie, maybe we'll concentrate more like this. Challenge your perceptions of what a horror movie is. You're definitely going to find it in the category. You're definitely going to label it as a category, but you're going to find things that you ever see traditionally in horror movies.
See, he consistently, for me, has done good work. Yeah. Where, like, I've been impressed.
I've been apologetic for Hellraiser Inferno.
I don't like Hellraiser Inferno at all. I don't. And the problem with that movie is, it wasn't supposed to be a Hellraiser movie, but when you look at something like
Exorcism, take Hellraiser out of it, it's a great movie.
Exorcism of Emily Rose being like a horror take on a law film, is like such a cool idea. Is that we're a courtroom drama with horror elements. Sinister, I think, has a lot of great elements. There's a few things that don't work as well for me. Doctor Strange, I think, is a very, very visually stunning feast. I think it's a great character story. It kind of dances on the same beats as a few other films.
Comedy for me.
But like so many of his films, I think, are like, you got a handle on it. And I like that he works with the same people, that he carries the people that work with him to the next film. The Black Phone, for me, seems like a convalescence, like everything that he's learned in his career, and he's putting it on display here in a really technically prowess kind of a film that, again, I like that he doesn't always go straight-laced horror. Even so much of like Sinister is Ethan Hawke's character looking at film reels and just seeing something spooky and being like, oh, that's spooky. Like, that's not even really a horror film on its own. It's just because we have a monster in it. Like the way he dances around genre is really cool to me.
But I'm going to sell it. I'm just going to put it out objectively. If you're looking for it as an engaging horror movie, something like Scream, you're not going to find it in this one. Especially if you haven't done your research and look from blind, you might get disappointed because it's not a traditional kind of a horror movie perception, especially if you think it's Blumhouse.
Yeah. But that's why I think we need more movies like The Black Phone, is because we need to challenge what horror can be, because we need to look at it like Scream, very straight-laced film. Had this come out next to Scream, probably would have gotten buried because Scream has the name. But I think this is a great technical piece of horror-esque movies where we get to challenge what it means to be scary. My wife was watching this with me. She jumped a number of times at things that weren't even jump scares, just because she felt the dread. She felt the intensity of the moment.
I think it's, you get the feeling for it.
It's tough for me to rank things based on if they scare me, though, because I'm not trying to sound cool. I don't get scared by stuff anymore. I've watched way too many horror movies. So,
but one of the things I have a problem with is I don't see the motivation behind why the phone works for him. I don't get a clarity. I don't get a clarity for the grabber overall. They're very empty. I understand that's his personality, but I just want something of the punch. The whole reason for he exhausts his whole life to do this, even killing his brother to do this. But I don't have that. I understand that the sister, we should, what motivation for her, the correspondent for her and all this stuff, and I understand that, but it don't have the explanations for me that I wanted. I understand the short story probably don't get it, but why does the phone work for him and not for him? Why are you getting all this?
See, not having read the story, I don't know for certain, but one thing I can say is that Joe Hill's thing as a writer, he loves to deal with things about people having special abilities, special clairvoyance, things like that, usually connected to a totem or a piece. Yeah. If you read his book Nosferatu, it's a woman who every time she rides on her bike, she can travel across space and time with it. Another character can read the future based on Scrabble tiles in that book. Like, it's kind of like we use the elements, the tangible pieces around us to create our special abilities. I think of like the sister, I feel like she's using that cross, the dollhouse, to kind of like push her dreams forward. Finney's character uses the phone.
I understand. And she builds it like it's a little more like it's her personal altar. Right. But I just want explanation a little more. Why does this work for him?
Oh.
And that's the whole point that if he doesn't know, then he finds the way that's the key to discovery more about himself rather than just listening how backstory.
Yeah, fair enough. It wasn't something that bothered me, but I can see it something that doesn't work for some people. Yeah, I can.
Yeah, because you're gonna put a kid in a cell, then the phone doesn't work, but all of a sudden it works for him. Which is like, okay, I'll take the phone out.
Yeah, but that's why I like upon rewatching the film, I really like seeing that Ethan Hawke's character, when he first takes him down there, he hears the phone ringing. And he stops him and he goes, "Did you hear that? Did you hear the phone?" And like we're meant to think, I think we're meant to think at the time that he's going upstairs to answer the actual phone, but he's hearing it himself. And so I like that there's an element of comparison between the two of them. And I don't think it's a mistake that Mason Thames kind of looks like a younger Ethan Hawke. That there's like kind of like a little bit of element of similarity.
A little bit. I mean, in the movie, I thought that was going to be younger Ethan Hawke. We're going to get a reason.
Jamie, my wife Jamie said the exact same thing, where she said like, "Oh, is this a flashback or something?" I was like, "No, it's just a movie."
I think we're gonna. It'd be interesting to see what the catalyst for the whole reason for this, other than because there's a reason for kids. Does he consider himself just still be a kid?
Yep.
Or he's just trying to beat the kids and as a metaphor to just beat himself.
One other thing that I think is fascinating about this, that maybe goes back to my argument of horror here, is there is talk of a sequel because the movie made a lot of money. And what I find most fascinating of all is that the idea for a sequel is coming from Joe Hill, and it has to do with the things that are different in the movie version. So I find it fascinating that he's interested in making a sequel to a film that's based on his work, but the things that came up with him were things like the masks, things like the grabber's backstory that he wanted to delve into.
Are they going to do like Terrifier 2 to explain the motivations? And
I don't know. Maybe.
Because we don't really get a lot of that for the Terrifier of why Art the Clown does this stuff. We don't get a lot of what the grabber does.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a good way to, I mean, that's one thing that's nice about horror is that horror fans will come back for a second helping, and you can use your opportunity to say, hey, we didn't get enough of this the first time around. Yeah. Let's put it in the second one.
So, overall, I haven't seen enough movies to make a list yet, but yeah, it was a great film. I don't think I'll watch it again, but I'm glad that you liked it.
I absolutely adored it. So much so that I'm actually thinking of fixing what I usually do for my top 10.
A lot of my
to allow it in there.
Film reviewers give it high praise too.
Yeah, I didn't think this year, after X came out earlier this year, I didn't think we were going to have a better horror movie than X. I enjoyed the hell out of that movie. But I'm so impressed by the fact that I've got 3 major horror releases for the year sitting on my top 10. It's been a really great year for horror on TV, horror in cinemas, horror books.
And I'm not slamming it or critiquing or hate it.
Just work differently for you.
Yeah, but the kids are great in the movie.
I think they're fantastic. I think it's funny that Madeline McGraw, Derrickson actually pushed off production because she was busy working on something, and he wanted to cast her that bad. And she is fantastic in the movie. Yeah. But yeah, and I've got a new Halloween costume.
I'm not going to even point those 2 kids, even the entire people, inventing the pinball players.
Yeah. Well, I didn't even get to call out Jeremy Davies, who I really, really adored playing the dad. I've been in love with him. I mean, he was great as Oppum in Saving Private Ryan, even though, again, that character is despicable. But I fell in love with Jeremy Davies as an actor on Lost during his, couple seasons that he did of that show. And he's fantastic. And I think he's one of those guys he's comfortable playing really unlikable people. and guys that have messy moral compasses. I like that we're not given redemption for his character in the film, but that we get an understanding for his character, even if we don't condone his actions. He's kind of like, kind of like what I said about the Joker.
It's a perfect casting for that character.
Exactly. Yep.
We get Jeremy Davis. Hey, before we begin, before we end, name drop our friend Andrew Hunt's got a movie coming out this month in September called The Infernal Machine, and Jeremy Davies is in the movie. So
it's another reason I want to see it.
Yeah, he's in the movie, and of course it's about writers. That's another reason. If you can check it out, it's going to be available in theaters soon and be on Paramount Plus. It's Infernal Machine.
Very cool. So, yeah.
Congratulations, Andrew. Yeah, that's all about the Black Phone.
Yeah, let us know your thoughts on the film down below. What short story of Joe Hill should they adapt next? I think he's got a better track record of adaptations than his father does.
Doesn't he like an anthology like Clive Barker did?
So he did 20th Century Ghosts, the short story collection that this came from, and he also did one called Full Throttle that has a number of stories. I've read that one; it's pretty darn good. But he's got Horns. They've got Nosferatu, the TV series that ran for a while. He did Lock and Key, so he's had a very good track record for adaptations, much better than his dad at times.
I'm going to call it. I'm going to say this was written at night. I think this is a night written story.
Probably during the times in which Doctor Strange was weighing on Cargill and Derrickson. Yeah, let us know your thoughts on the film down below. And while you're down there, please like and subscribe. There are 2 free things that you can do that help to support the channel and make sure you never miss new episodes of the show as they drop. Check out that Patreon down below, and until we see you guys next time, you can find my film reviews over at goatfilmreviews.com.
You can find my show, the St. Paul Filmcast, anywhere you find podcasts, and don't call me.